I'm Tom. Welcome to my grow room. So my video today is just on putting together a worm bin, a worm composting bin. I have set up a worm bin before, but I kept it in my garage, and the worms ended up dying. And I think it's just because it got too cold in there. Worms are cold resistant, but they tend to get more dormant when it's cold, and so I've put this worm bin in my basement. I've seen other videos where people keep them in their basement, and I'm a little bit unsure because I don't want a massive stinky bin of stuff in my basement. My wife would not be cool with that. But I've done some more research this time before I just kind of set up a compost bin, threw some worms in, and whatever happened. So some things I've learned, which I pass on to you guys if you do want to set up a worm bin. You don't want to add too much food, compostable materials at once. You only want to add enough that the worms can consume, and then add a little bit more. So I'm going to have my worm bin in my basement, and then I'm going to have my other compost bin in my garage. So I'm going to add a little bit of food to my worm bin, let them break it down, add a little bit more, and any excess compostable materials will go into my compost bin in my garage. And then I can always take from there as well and add some of that into the worm bin. Some things you want to keep out of your worm bin are citrus or acidic things. Worms are sensitive to acidic foods, stuff like that. I got Pip. He always comes and checks out what I'm doing up here. I think he wonders if I'm just talking to myself or what's going on. Likes to sniff everything. Hopefully he doesn't get too interested in the worm bin. But anyway, so I put a video together about how I put my worm bin together, and I'm going to do an update in the coming days, weeks, just to see if it is producing a bunch of smell, and if it is, I'm going to have to probably move it out of my basement or figure something out. So it's important not to add acidic foods, citrus, peelings, that kind of stuff. Or if you do, only add a very small amount. Don't add like a crap load of like lemon cores or lemon peels or whatever. So yeah, not too much acidic. Don't add too much stuff at once. Keep it moist, but not soaking. Worms can drown, so it just needs to be moist. Yeah, I bought trout worms from a live bait store in town, and they look to me like earthworms, and I'm hoping they will work like earthworms, but I'm not too sure. It's kind of a little experiment. I think your best bet would be if you have worms already in your garden, if you can collect some of those and put those in a bin. That would be better. You know that they're natural. They will go in your soil, and then as your worm bin gets going and it produces more worms and worm castings, you know that you can add those worms and stuff into the soil without any worries. I'm not sure if these trout worms will be okay in my soil, so kind of going out, you know, just experimenting here, but that's because those are the only worms I could get at this time of year. And there are worms around in Medicine Hat, but they only seem to come out, and you can only really collect them when it rains. They come out on the, the sidewalks and stuff. We do have naturally sandy clay soil with not too much organic matter in, so you really have to work at getting a healthy worm population in your garden. It's not just naturally there in the natural soil. I mean, there are worms there, but not at the level that is good. So yeah, take a look at my worm bin, and any suggestions or any feedback, I would really love to hear it. Okay, so this is going to be the bottom tote for my worm bin. I used little valve spigot off of my camping water container. Sacrificed it, but I'm sure you could buy a spigot that would work just fine. And I cut a hole and wedged it in there as tight as I could, and then sealed it very messily with some just quick seal, waterproof seal. So I gotta let that cure. I don't really care that it's that messy, as this is going to be just a worm bin. And I sealed it also on the inside. So I'm just going to wait. It says to wait at least 36 hours before exposing it to any moisture. And I just stuck these 2 coffee cans in here, which the tote that the worms and the food and compostable stuff's going to go in, that tote is going to sit on top of these coffee cans, just so it's above the level of that spigot. And I'm going to raise the whole thing up so that I can get a watering can underneath the spigot to fill with the worm tea, worm liquid. And yeah, so that's the start of it. So I'm just going to wait for that to dry, and we'll get this thing put together. Okay everyone, my worm bin, the sealant is dried. I let it dry for a couple days. So that's the base of my worm bin. It's got a couple coffee cans. It's kind of dark, I'm down in my basement. But a couple coffee cans in there, which the bin that the worms are going to go in is going to sit on top of. And then just so it's above the level of that spigot. I think using a smaller spigot that would be closer to the bottom of the container would be good, because in order to drain this, the liquid in there is probably going to have to get to the level of at least like 3 to 4 inches. So you know, having a smaller one right at the base of the tote, or even to put it on the underside, if I raised it up more and put it directly in the bottom center, a drainage hole of some kind, that would be the best way to keep all the liquid drained out of there. I have tried a worm bin before, but I kept it in my garage, and even though my garage is insulated, we get very cold winters here in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, and I think the cold, it just got too cold in the garage for the worms, and I think I added too much food for them, too much compostable material that they kind of went a little bit dormant because of the cold. Added all that stuff in there, and they ended up dying in the bin. So I mean, I still made compost out of it. I still let it break down and used it in my garden, but it wasn't a functioning worm bin. So some of the things I've learned from that are you need to be careful. You need to keep it moist, but not too wet, because the worms will drown. You don't want to add tons of food for them, just a little bit at a time and let them break it down. And if you only add a little bit at a time, from what I've seen and read, it really cuts down on the smell. Because basically what happens is they will consume the materials as they're decomposing, so you don't have this mass of rotting material just sitting there. You introduce your scraps while they're still fairly fresh, and the worms consume the decomposing parts of the food. Kind of like how maggots can clean a wound. They'll eat the rotten flesh. I know it's a gross idea, but they'll eat the rotten flesh and they'll leave the healthy stuff behind. So it's the same kind of idea with the worms. They'll take care of the stuff that's rotting, which will produce a smell, and then as long as you're not adding too much, they will keep up with the decomposing process. So I've got this bin in place and my spigot there, and I've convinced my wife to let me keep this in the basement. But I will be honest, and I will record another video after I've had this thing going for a while, and if it is causing a smell, I will post that, because I've seen other people keep it in their basement, and they say it doesn't produce a smell, so I trust them. But if it does produce a smell for me, which I don't want that in my house, I will definitely record that honestly, and I will abandon keeping this in my basement, because I do not want a basement stinking like rotting food. So this is the worm bin. It's got holes drilled all up the side for ventilation, and I put a lot of drainage holes in the bottom. These holes all along the side are a little bit big. A worm could definitely go through that. I'm hoping they don't. But I already had this tote drilled. These were ventilation holes to have some seedlings starting in here. So I decided to use it because it already had holes drilled in it. But I drilled very small drainage holes in the bottom that a worm could definitely not go through. Hopefully, anyway. And I put a couple inches of ripped up newspaper. Finer shred would be better, but I don't have a shredder, so I just ripped it up the best I could. So yeah, I put about a couple inches of newspaper. So this is just going to rest in the bin on top of those coffee cans, like so. And I'm going to add, I'm going to moisten this down, make sure everything is moist. You want it, you know, like a wrung out sponge, you know, moist but not soaking wet so the worms don't drown. It's important you keep that moisture level consistent. So I'll go ahead and water this in, and then I'll add some compost and some food, not too much, and I'll add my worms to that, and that'll be the bin ready to go. Okay, so I added water to the newspaper, and it drained nicely into the bottom tote. So I'm going to add a little bit of a layer of compost, and then I'm going to add the worms to that, and then I'm going to add the food on top. Okay, so I purchased 12 trout worms from Live Bait store in town, and to me they look like the ones that were closest to earthworms. I'm hoping they're not all dead in there and they're actually, you know, alive. So let's dump them out and hopefully they move around. So there's my 12 worms. Some of them are moving. I figured these look the closest to just regular earthworms, so I'm hoping they will do the trick. They seem pretty. Oh, they're starting to move a bit more. Trying to get away from the light. So hopefully they work. They're getting more active now. They're out of that Ziploc bag. That probably feels pretty good. So hopefully they're going to work their way. So I just got a very thin layer of compost, and now I'm just going to carefully add some more food just around them. I don't want to put a ton of food on top of them. Just lightly cover them with some stuff, and we'll see how it goes. But they are alive. At least most of them look like they're moving, so that's a good sign. Okay, so I added a thin layer of stuff, and then a little bit of more cardboard and a little bit more stuff on top. I'm worried that, again, maybe I added a little bit too much stuff for them to eat and break down. But if I notice it's starting to smell, I will remove some of the stuff to see if that helps. But yeah, that's it basically finished. Just gonna pop a lid on there. And they're still got these vent holes here, so we'll get aeration in there. That'll just help keep it nice and moist in there. I'm not sure if I added enough liquid to drain anything, but we can give that a whirl. Nope. So the level in the tote is obviously not high enough. But that's good. It's not leaking anywhere. So it's, at least I don't have any leaks around that. So although I don't have enough liquid in there to drain off anything, it looks like the sealant is doing a good job and there's no moisture coming around the bottom. It looks like the tote is nice and waterproof. So I'll do an update on the worm bin as it goes along, and hopefully it produces some good compost for me and some good worm castings as well.